button and to turn it on. That would help too, wouldn't it? Got power now. Woo. Okay. Well, good to be with you again this morning. Lovely to meet you. Meet some new faces too. Well, Chash, welcome back. And Neil, good to see you. And good to see you guys. Yeah, so it's hello. Good. So today, of course, we have our communion service. This is the sermonette part. And the communion service, of course, is two parts. We have the ordinance of humility or the foot washing, and we have the Lord's Supper that we remember. And today I just want to go back in time again and ask the question, well, are you prepared? Preparing for the Passover and the communion service. That's what I want to look at today. And the preparation that would have happened during the lead up to what we now know as the Lord's Supper. We know that it was in the context of the Passover. So there was great excitement in Jerusalem as people gathered from far and near to celebrate a special occasion. It was the Passover service. And this was a time where the people of God would remember how the angel of death had passed over their houses. And Jesus and his disciples were going to gather for this special occasion as well. And there were actually three feasts associated with the Passover. Anybody remember what they are? I talked about this last time I was here. They're found in the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. They're called the synoptic Gospels because they're very similar. John's a bit out there on his own. And in each of these accounts is the Lord's Supper. And of course, John takes the account of the foot washing. It also dates back to Leviticus. And there was these three feasts, the Passover or the Pesach. There was the Unleavened Bread and the first fruits. And they date back, of course, back to the original Passover in Egypt in Exodus 12 and the story of the last plague of Egypt. And it's interesting, we've just been looking at the book of Genesis and how they came to be in Egypt with Joseph being the prime minister and Jacob, because of the famine and God directing him going into Egypt. As his name, of course, was changed to Israel, and that's how we get the children of Israel, or the Israelites, later known as the Hebrews, probably because they spoke Hebrew, being in Egypt. And now we come down to the other end of the story, where they're finally going to get back out of Egypt, as was promised. Took probably not too much time to get into Egypt, but it certainly took a long time to get out of Egypt. And you remember that this was the last plague, and it was some instructions Moses gave to put the blood on the doorpost of the houses. Where was the blood from? From a lamb, innocent lamb, of course, pointing forward to Jesus being the Lamb of God. This is where the angel of death passed over their houses, all the houses that had the blood on their doorposts, and thus where the name comes from, Passover. So there's a bit backstory. So now we're looking at the preparation. We come back down to Jesus' time, and Jesus gives some instructions to two of his disciples. And let's look it up in Luke chapter 22 and verse 7 to 13. Anybody know who the two disciples were? Well, we'll find out in a minute. Luke chapter 22, starting at verse 7, reading through to verse 13. Luke 22. So it tells us here, Jesus and his disciples prepare the Passover. And in verse 7 it says, then came the day of unleavened bread. Remember, that was part of that celebration where the Passover must be killed. Passover being the lamb. And he said to Peter and John, two of his key disciples, to go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it. And so they would have gone out. And so they said to him, where do you want us to prepare? And Jesus said, "Behold, you will enter the city, and a man carrying a pitcher of water, you'll see a man carrying a pitcher of water, follow him into the house at which he enters. Then you will find, or shall say to the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large furnished upper room. There make ready." And so they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared for the Passover. Preparation for the Passover. Interesting. How would they know which guy it was that they should follow? Well, he was carrying something. What was he carrying? And I'm just going to bring out some props out of my box here. He was carrying a water jug. Maybe he had it on his head. Maybe he was carrying it like this. We're not really told, but he was carrying a water jug. Now, why would that be obvious? You think, oh, there'd be lots of fellas carrying water jugs, you know. They had to go down to the wells and get the water jugs. Why would that be obvious which bloke to follow? Anybody know? Well, blokes didn't carry. That was women's jobs. You know, they had very distinct jugs. It was women's business carrying the water jugs. And so this guy would have stuck out. It's like, oh, there he is. He's the only one carrying a water jug. And so we put the water jug up there. They followed the guy. They come to an upper room, and there they make preparations. So, what needed to be done to prepare for the Passover? Well, firstly, we had to get rid of the yeast. Okay? So, here I have an example of some yeast. So, no. 7 days before the Passover, you need to get rid of all products with yeast, or another name is leaven. I've blown my cover there. I should have said leaven. What's another word for leaven? Yeast. Yeah, there it is. I went round the rather wrong way. So for 7 days, they had to get rid of the yeast, so they had to clean it out of their houses. There's the text up on the screen, goes back to Genesis 12. Not to eat any yeast, not to have yeast in their house. They had to get rid of it. So, this is a no-no. We'll have to get rid of that. Where can I put it? I'll empty the box and I'll put it in there shortly. Yes, and shortly we'll have to just go around and make sure there's no yeast in the house here. So get ready for that. Let me continue on. I'll come back to that. Oh, let's do it now, actually. Is there any leaven in the house? Children especially, can you just go around, make sure there's no leaven in the house? That's anything with yeast in it. Make sure there's no bits of bread lying around anywhere. Can you help us with that? Go around. I think there may be some hiding around here somewhere. So adults can help them. So just go around and make sure there's no bread lying around anywhere. Okay, and then we better bring it up here. And get rid of that bread, that yeast. It's got yeast in it. Oh, hang on. I forgot to put the tablecloth on. I'll get rid of that. Yeah. Have you found some? Oh, bring it up here. We'll chuck it in the box here. And we're going to take that out and burn it later. Yeah, so chuck it in here. I'm going to put the tablecloth on. Just here. I wasn't so prepared today. I was meant to have this already set up. But I wasn't as prepared as I could have been. And sometimes like that, isn't it? In our lives. We think we're prepared, but then stuff happens to us and we find we're not that prepared. Oh, yes, chuck it in the box. Thank you. Any more? There's 4 pieces. I think my wife might have helped to, so she might be able to, if you can't find it. So we're getting rid of the yeast or the leaven. Now, it's interesting, in the Jewish culture, in the thing, they actually, at the end, they do a symbolic, they get rid of it for 7 days, and then at the end, thanks so much, the day before the Passover, the father and the sons I don't have any sons, so maybe they allow daughters, go around and they check to make sure there's no yeast anywhere in the house, and they do it with a candle. I just bought some candles the other day for our cow in the arbor, and I was going to bring that, but my wife thought it was a bit of an overkill. I did bring a little torch, but this is my candle, all right? You've got a good imagination. This is a candle. We're going around the house looking. And then when they found the yeast, they would use a feather, of all things. Yeah, can you get that? That's good. A feather, and I did read something. They used a feather and a spoon to get rid of the last bit of yeast. So we'll just do that here. Pop that in there. We don't want any yeast. What's the issue with yeast or leaven? What was the story of yeast and leaven? Well, it has a few different symbols. Back in the first Passover, remember they couldn't allow the bread to rise. They didn't have time for it to rise, so they didn't have any yeast in it. So it was unleavened or unyeasted bread because there was haste and there was things. So that was one part. And I read there was a few other reasons, but as we come down, the logic is that yeast is fermentation. It's a bit like pollution, and then it continues on to be representing of sin. Yeah, it's quite an interesting way they came to the deduction of that. There's another piece there. All right, so we've got rid of the yeast or the leaven, and I've got a flatty. Hang on. Bit embarrassing in the middle of a sermon to get a flatty. Children know what a flatty is. It's when your shoelace comes undone. So we're going to take that yeast. We'll chuck it over here. Remind me to get it later, because we need to get that out of the house and burn it. Let me continue on. When I find the clicker thing, here it is. All right, so as it's got on there, it represents often sin. And here it is. So I asked the question, what leaven or yeast, i.e. sin, is in our lives that we need Jesus, the light of the world. Remember, they used a light, a candle, to find and clean from our hearts and minds. That's a personal question. Is there anything in our lives that we know God is working on our hearts and minds? And then one day, sin will be forever burnt and destroyed. Isn't that good news? It's like, when they go and burn the bread. And that's looking forward to one day when there'll be the total elimination of sin and sadness. They burn the leaven, etc. So we get back to the upper room. What would have been going on in the upper room when John and who was the other fella? Peter would have got that assignment? I imagine they probably went down to the markets and got a whole lot of stuff. They went down to the grocery store. Don't know what the grocery store was like. Wouldn't have been the ones we have today. But they would have gone to the markets, and what would they got? What sort of things would they have got? Help me out here. Flour? Yeah, maybe. Well, they might have got pre-packaged. Yeah, so what are some of the things? They would have gone and they found the room was there, and they might have set it up something like this. So they might have set it up a little bit like that. You see, you've got the menorah. The menorah, so there's a little menorah here. So that's the 7-branch candlestick, reminding them of the temple and the tabernacle before that. So we'll stick the menorah there. And and so they would have got lots of this. Do you know what this stuff is? Showbread. Yeah, it's like showbread. Yeah. It's sort of, showbread was probably the precursor of unleavened bread, isn't it? Unleavened bread, unyeasted bread. In the Jewish circles, they call it matzah. Matzah. We'll talk a bit more about this in coming communion service. Matzah bread. And, of course, they would have had the juice as well. So we have representations of this as also. They would have set up some other things here. So this is the juice, the cup, Maybe they had some grapes, and they would have had the juice ready to go, and the unleavened bread in there. And of course they would have had a bowl set aside there for when the guests came in, and they would have had a jug of water, which got left at home, jug of water. There's another jug. Maybe I was going to use that one. Jug of water and a towel ready for the guest to have their feet washed. It was a customary thing. It was a very practical thing. They were wandering around in sandals. So, yeah, imagine how icky their feet might have got, especially with their, the other traffic that was on the roads and yuck. And so it was a very practical thing, a sign of hospitality, etc. And so they had that set up. But they forgot something. What did they forget? They forgot to organise the servant or somebody to actually wash the feet. And that became a bit of an issue, didn't it? And that's what we're going to remember very shortly now. That Jesus, when the awkwardness of the time came and they're all looking at each other and going, who's going to wash the feet? I'm not going to do it. No way, that's not my job. And I suppose there was a few eyes looking at Peter and John. Peter, you forgot. John, you forgot. Very awkward. What does Jesus do? He breaks that awkwardness. He gets up himself and washes these guys' dirty, smelly feet. Amazing, isn't it? And what does he tell us to do? He told his disciples and tell us to do, serve one another. And he said, do this as well. He gave us instructions to humble ourselves as he did and wash each other's feet. And we have opportunity right now to do that. So I'd like to encourage you to now go and wash each other's feet. Dave, you better give us some of the instructions where to go. I don't know, out there.